Welcome to this tutorial in the Introduction to Mongoose video training series. In this series, we acquaint you with the basics of Mongoose architecture, operation, and features. In this tutorial, we will be talking about how to download and install the Mongoose application software, how to use the Mongoose configuration wizard to create the databases required to build and run Mongoose-based applications, and how to use the Configuration Manager to create and configure a working developer configuration. And we should also mention that if you are using Mongoose from the cloud, then all of this is already done for you. Before you can install and use the Mongoose framework for application development, you must download the Mongoose software from the Infor Download Center. You should also be aware that the Mongoose installation guide is not included in the software download package, so you need to download it separately, either from the documentation section of Infor Extreme or from our Mongoose portal. Then, you must have the correct environment set up for it. For detailed and up-to-date information on system requirements, see the Mongoose Guide to Technology and Installation Guides, both available from the Mongoose portal. But let us give you here a high-level summary. First, you must have one or more computers using a supporting Windows operating system. Windows 7, Windows XP, Windows Server 2008, and Windows Server 2012 are all supported. Next, you must have SQL Server client tools pointing to a database server. This server must be running SQL Server 2008 Release 2 or SQL Server 2012, and it can be local or a shared database server. These tools will be used for modifying SQL code on your computer when it becomes necessary. Visual Studio 2010 is required for serious application development work, for form scripting, and for coding IDEO extension classes, for instance. For web rendering, you will need .NET 4.5. .NET supports the building and running of the application. It also supports the XML web services known as runtime services, which we will discuss further in later tutorials. Finally, if you want to use a source control system, you should have that source control system installed and configured. Mongoose currently supports 3 source control systems: Microsoft Visual Source Safe version 2005 or later, Microsoft Team Foundation Server version 2010 or later, and Apache Subversion version 1.7.6 or later. For details about these prerequisites and their setups, see the Mongoose installation guide. Well, once you have the prerequisites ready, it is time to set up and configure the Mongoose development environment. The first step is to install the Mongoose framework software. This involves setting up the database server, the application and web server, and an administrative client, all of which we talked about in the previous tutorial. As part of the database server setup, we will create the development databases where the development work takes place, and the master databases, which house the actual finalized runtime data. The master database is considered by some optional, but for full source control and development lifecycle management, it is needed. If you are using source control, you must also set up the source control database and have at least one user profile for the code checkout and check-in. Finally, you must create Mongoose configurations for both the development and the master databases. When you purchase Mongoose, you should receive instructions for downloading and installing the Mongoose software package. The installation package is a zipped ISO folder that you must extract to your local computer before you can install the software. We recommend extracting it to a temporary folder. Once the installation package has been extracted, open the installation folder. Start the installation by double-clicking the setup.exe file. This launches the Mongoose installation wizard. In a typical installation, you would install the database server software on a dedicated database server and the utility server software on a dedicated application server. Note that the utility server option installs both the application server and web server pieces. You can, however, install both the database server and the utility server software on a single computer. For a single server development environment installation, you would select both the database server and utility server options on the first page of the wizard. For more information on these options, see the Mongoose installation and configuration guide. You should also install the administrative client on the machine where you plan to do your development work, so you have everything you will need. This can be on a remote client or right on one of the Mongoose servers. Again, for more information, including the full process and procedures to install the Mongoose software, see the Mongoose Installation and Configuration Guide. Once the basic software installation completes, it should have added menu items to your Start Programs menu, including one for the Infor Mongoose Configuration Wizard. You can locate the Infor Mongoose Configuration Wizard by clicking Start Programs, Infor, Setup, Infor Mongoose Configuration Wizard. Make sure you are on the database server and then start the wizard. Note that you must run the configuration wizard as administrator. Select the Create Databases option and then click Next. On the Summary of Databases to Create page, use the Add button to instruct the wizard what databases you want to create. For development purposes, you should create an application database, taking note of the name you give this database because you will need it later when you are licensing the database and users to access it. 2 forms databases, one to use for development and the other to be used as the master database for production. An objects database. Note that there is no need for a separate master objects database because Mongoose manages the check-in and check-out operations within a single objects database. And the templates databases. Like the forms databases, you must have 2 of these for development work, a development version and a master version. Both the new form wizard and the new data maintenance wizard in Mongoose use the templates database data for their settings. Optionally, you can also create templates databases for both the master forms and the archive forms databases. This makes for a total of 8 databases that Mongoose uses to manage your application data and metadata. Note that you must create each database individually using the configuration wizard. For each database that you create, you must configure these things: the DNS name or IP address of the database server. If you are installing the database on the server where you are running the configuration wizard, you can use the local setting. The SQL Server login credentials to be used when accessing the database, and the name of the database itself. A best practice is to use the name of your application appended with the type of the database you are creating as part of the name. For example, for our tutorial, we will call our first database issue-tracking_app. Generally, you can accept the defaults for the remaining fields. Note that the login information provided here is for SQL Server access, not the computer login or Mongoose application login. For application databases only, you must also define a site to be associated with the application. So, define the site and set the time zone. When you click the Next button, the database is added to the list of databases. You must click the Add button and repeat this process for each of the databases. When you are finished specifying all the databases to create, click Next and then click Commit. It is the Configuration Manager that we must use to finish setting up our application and configuration for development. To create a new configuration that uses your newly created databases, first open the Configuration Manager. Remember that the Configuration Manager is typically available on the application server and not the database server, assuming you have them installed on different servers, and you must run it as administrator. As a tip, you can also set the properties for the Configuration Manager shortcut so that it always runs as administrator. Once the Configuration Manager is open, make sure the Configurations tab is selected and then click the New button. In the New Configuration dialog box, assign a name for your new configuration and click OK. For this tutorial, we will call our configuration issue-tracking_dev because this is where we will be doing our application development work. In the Edit Configuration dialog box, make sure the Runtime Client tab is selected. First, we are going to configure the Runtime Application Database. The group box for this is on the left side of the Runtime Client tab. To do this, we must provide login credentials for the application database, which is the same as the SQL Server login credentials we created earlier. We must also provide the name of the server being used for the databases. Once we have provided this information, click the Test User button to verify that we can successfully connect to the database server. Assuming we have it set up correctly, we should get a confirmation message letting us know that we are successfully connected. Having established a connection with the database server, we can now select the application database we want to use for our configuration from the database name drop-down list. This would be the issue tracking _ app database that we created earlier. Finally, in the application field, we specify an application for the configuration to use. If the drop-down list does not have the application you want to specify, you can define it here. We do not yet have the application ID defined, so we will create it now. Start by typing in the name by which you want to identify the application. Then click the Edit button. In the Edit Application dialog box, we need to specify at least the application name. We can also specify other aspects of how the application will look when it runs in WinStudio, such as the splash image file. This is the one Mongoose uses when a user is logging in. The application icon file. This is used for the title bar, desktop shortcuts, and other places. On the Options tab, the wallpaper options for the main Mongoose workspace, and the Help Server URL location. This must be in the format http://webservername/installation virtual directory. For more information on any of these and other options, see the online help. Now we go through the same basic process for the Runtime Forms database, using the same login credentials and the same server as for the Runtime Application database. This time, however, we select the appropriate Forms database for the database name field. Next, we must specify a Form Templates database for our configuration to use from the Form Templates database name drop-down list. This is the Templates database we created earlier. Before leaving this tab, we must create the SA user login password. Mongoose uses this login data to access the databases from WinStudio. Click the Set Password button. If this is the first time creating an application in configuration, the SA user has not yet been created, so the system should ask whether we want to create the user. Click OK. We must provide the password to use for the SA login, and then we can click OK. Note that you can also use this same button and dialog box to reset the SA password for WinStudio at any time. Moving on to the Form Control tab, next we will configure the Master Forms database and the Master Templates database. We can use the same database server and login settings that we used for the runtime databases. For the database name, we will select the Master Forms database we created earlier, and for the Form Templates database name, we will use the same templates database that we used for the Runtime Forms database. Finally, we need to set up the Objects database. Select the Objects Metadata tab. We will use this tab to configure the database that is to be used to store and process the IDO metadata. Click the Set Objects DB Specification button. In the Set Objects Metadata Server/Database dialog box, use the same login credentials and server name that you have used for the previous database configurations. For the database name, select the database we created earlier to serve this purpose, namely issue tracking _ objects. Click OK. Once all that is done, click OK in the Edit Configuration dialog box to return to the Configuration Manager. Back in the Configuration Manager, we have just one more thing to attend to. We must designate a web server. Start by selecting the Web Servers tab and clicking the New button. In the New Web Server dialog box, specify a name by which to identify the web server and click OK. In the next dialog box, we will add the name of our web server after the HTTP stem. This is the name of the computer on which we installed the utility server software. Then click OK. Anytime you create or make a change to a Mongoose configuration, you must stop and restart the Infor services before the system can recognize and open the configuration. So let's take a quick look at how to do that. As a rule, you must be on the application server to stop and restart the Infor services. Start by opening the Administrative Tools window. The procedure for this is slightly different depending on your Windows operating system. Once there, double-click the Services option. In the Services window then, scroll down until you find the Infor Framework IDO Runtime Service. Right-click and select the Restart option from the menu. Whenever you restart the IDO Runtime Service, Mongoose also requires that other associated services must also restart. To proceed, we will go ahead and click Yes. At this point then, Mongoose stops and restarts all the indicated services, and we should be ready to log in to our new configuration. That's it. We are now finished with the installation and initial configuration, and we are ready to log in. To log in, click the Infor Mongoose item on the Windows Start menu, or double-click the Infor Mongoose desktop icon. The first time we log in, we must use the SA login because we have not yet created any other user login profiles or credentials. For the password, use the password, if any, you created for the WinStudio SA login earlier in the Configuration Manager. Click OK, and we're in. That's it. Mongoose is now installed and configured on our development machine. We have configured the database tier with the required databases. We have set up our application server, web server, and configuration to work in the middle tier, and we have installed the administrative client to provide user access. In this tutorial then, we learned how to install and configure the Mongoose software for a developer environment. We downloaded and installed the software package. Then we used the Mongoose Configuration Wizard to create the necessary databases. Finally, we used the Configuration Manager to create and configure both an application and a working developer configuration. So, what's next? In the next tutorial in this series, we will learn how to set our system up to work with a source control system. Before you go on though, we recommend that you go ahead and install the Mongoose software on your system, create the necessary databases, and configure your application and developer environment if you have not already done so. Go ahead and bring your system to the point where we have come here using the Mongoose installation guide and these specifications. For more information, including more tutorials and complete documentation, visit our Mongoose portal at https://mongoose.infor.com/portal. For technical support, visit the Infor Extreme support website at https://www.inforextreme.com and log an incident there. Or feel free to contact us with your questions and comments at mongoose@infor.com. That's it for this tutorial. Until next time then, have a great Mongoose day.